Hello, today we're going to share on the 7th Sunday of Ordinary Time. That's February 23rd. And the main theme of the Gospel would be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. We'll go more deeply into this. And the first reading would be from 1 Samuel. In those days Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with 3,000 picked men of Israel to search for David in the desert of Ziph. Now, both David and Saul were chosen by God, but they later became enemies. And so now Saul, with 3,000 soldiers, went searching for David. So David and Abishai, Saul was searching for David in the desert of Ziph. So David and Abishai went among Saul's soldiers by night and found Saul lying asleep with the barricade, with his spear thrust into the ground at his head, and Abner and his men sleeping around him. That means his soldiers were sleeping around him. Abishai whispered to David, "God has delivered your enemy into your grasp this day. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not need a second thrust." But David said to Abishai, "Do not harm him, for who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain unpunished?" So David continued to regard Saul as being chosen by God, anointed by God, although they had become enemies. So David took this, for who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain unpunished? So David took the spear and the water jug from their place at Saul's head, and they got away without anyone's seeing or knowing or awakening. All remained asleep because the Lord had put them into a deep slumber. So David and one of his soldiers, Abishai, stole into the camp of Saul, and but they were all asleep and didn't know about it. And David took the spear at Saul's head and his water jug. So here's David wanted to indicate to Saul that he was in the camp, and he was able to take his spear and water jug from beside him without him knowing. So here is an indication that David wanted to give to Saul, that he was there and Saul was at his hand. So they were all asleep. And then David, going across to an opposite slope, David stood on a remote hilltop at a great distance from Abner, son of Ner, and the troops. He said, Abner would be one of the soldiers, chief soldiers among the troops, among the soldiers. And here David stood on the hilltop and shouted, "Here is the king's spear. Let an attendant come over to get it." So David wanted them to know that he had been in the camp and he had taken the spear. And he wanted them to know that they were at his hand. The Lord, then David gave a hint to Saul. The Lord will reward each man for his justice and faithfulness. So David was reminding Saul to have justice and faithfulness. "Today, though the Lord delivered you into my grasp, I would not harm the Lord's anointed." So David gave a reminder to Saul and reminded him that he still saw him as God's anointed and respected God's choice. So here we see the generosity of David. Now we come to the second reading of 1 Corinthians. The apostle said to the community, "Brothers and sisters, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit." Now the first man among humanity became a living being. And the last Adam would be Christ. And he was a life-giving spirit. So there is some difference here between a human living being and life-giving spirit. But the spiritual was not first, rather the natural and then the spiritual. But then Christ was here, the apostle was here showing that among humanity the spiritual was not first, but humanity was first in an historical order. The first man was from the earth, earthly. The second man from heaven. So there's a difference here. As was the earthly one, so also are the earthly. And as is the heavenly one, so also are the heavenly. Just as we have borne the image of the earthly one, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly one. So here the apostle was reminding them to remember the heavenly one, Christ, and remember that they are the earthly one, but they can also bear the image of the heavenly one, the image of Christ. So we must remember this. Now we come to the Gospel of Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who hear I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic." So here Jesus was talking about being generous and open, being generous to enemies, to those who hate you, who curse you, mistreat you, those who strike you on one cheek and takes your cloak. You must be generous to them. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that for you? To you? Even sinners love those who love them. But rather love your enemies and do good to them, and lend expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For He Himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. So here, be merciful as God the Father is merciful. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in return be measured out to you. So here Christ was telling us that we would gain from our generosity. So here, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. So here this gospel is stressed on merciful, being merciful. Now the seventh Sunday of Ordinary Time, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Be open and generous. Be open and generous. And in the 21st century, we must remember that God is love, and learn to holistically love God, love humans, and love the earth, manifesting the compassionate and merciful side and visage of Christ. So here, this Sunday, we must remember this. God is love, and be open and generous. God is love, and we must learn to holistically love God, love humans, love the earth. And God, the Father, is merciful, so is Christ. And when we do that, we are manifesting the visage of Christ, His merciful side. Okay? So let us learn about this. It's not easy, but it is very important to do it. Okay? God bless.